Hi, this is Tim Lounibos. You might remember me as Lieutenant Daniel Kwan on Star Trek Next Generation, Eye of the Beholder. And you are listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. One of the best things about Star Trek is how it's always pushed the boundaries when it came to race and gender. When Nichelle Nichols first appeared on board the Enterprise, not only was it a woman on the bridge, but it was a black woman. The show has always done its best to be ahead of the curve, and that has been the appeal of Star Trek to so many marginalized groups. Whoopi Goldberg was inspired to act thanks to seeing Uhura on TV, and here on Trek Untold, we've spoken to many other actors who have said similar things. Being able to identify with someone who looks like you and is doing something that feels out of your grasp helps remind us that nothing is impossible. And that leads us to today's guest, Tim Lounibos. Tim began acting in the early 90s, and you may have seen him in his appearances on Beverly Hills 90210 as Walter Chen, General Hospital as Dr. Bennett, Dr. Ron Bryant on Passions, and a host of other shows, including JAG, Crossing Jordan, The West Wing, Becker, The Practice, and many, many more, some of which we're going to discuss today. Most recently, you've seen him in Hawaii Five-0, and Tim had a recurring role in Bosch as Ed Sung. And of course, Tim was in an episode of the last season of Star Trek The Next Generation, as Lieutenant Daniel Kwan in Eye of the Beholder. He also lent his voice to a character in the Star Trek Away Team video game, and has one other appearance in the Star Trek franchise that's pretty surprising. But if you want to hear what that is, you're going to have to keep listening. This is also the first time we've had an Asian actor appear in the show, representing Eastern Asia in particular. We had Eric Avari recently, who would represent South Asia, being a native of Bengal, but Tim has a Korean heritage, along with being mixed race, which we're going to talk about today. When you look at the history of Star Trek, when it comes to Asian representation, the numbers are pretty small. It's something I started to notice when I began thinking about doing this podcast, and in turn paid more attention to who the supporting cast was. And of course there are obvious names you can mention in this discussion, and that would be of course George Takei as Lieutenant Sulu, Garrett Wang as Lieutenant Kim, and there's a handful of others I can name off the top of my head like Patty Yasutake, but really the numbers are extremely tiny when you look at it. And for the most part, the majority of those roles tend to be mostly just background characters doing nothing. Now, we're not going to do a deep dive into that today, but it's surprising for a show like Star Trek to be so big on diversity, but underrepresent the Asian community so much. But Star Trek isn't the only culprit in Hollywood that seems oblivious to Asian representation, and as you'll hear from Tim, it's something that is starting to improve, but there's a long road ahead. Tim has a story about working in Hollywood that's often been kept quiet, but today on Trek Untold, we help make sure he has a voice, and others in his community do too. Before we jump into our interview, I want to remind everyone to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Trek Untold, and that's all one word, no spaces. You can also support this show by visiting patreon.com/Trek Untold. If you want to check out some of our merch and put Trek Untold on a shirt, hoodie, mug, sticker, or something else, head on over to teespring.com/stores/Trek Untold to proudly display how much you like this podcast. And if you do happen to get some Trek Untold merch, go ahead and tag us on social media and let us know you got it. We'd love to see it. But most of all, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast and to leave a rating and a review. There is a lot of Star Trek podcasts out there, as I'm sure you already know, and leaving ratings and reviews helps people find us when they're searching for these types of shows. If you're already following us or offering your support in whatever way you can, be it a follow, review, monetarily, or even just listening today, thank you for the help. There's a family of Star Trek podcasts out there, and we appreciate you joining us here each and every week on the show. I'd also like to make a quick shout out to our friends at Triple Fiction Productions, who make some great 3D printed Star Trek inspired products for toys and people. But you'll hear more about them a little bit later on in the show. Now, without further ado, let's beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file.
Affirmative. Initiating program.
And welcome back to Trek Untold. And now joining us across the other side of the line, we've got a man with one Star Trek appearance you've seen, one you might have a vague idea about, and another that you've probably never ever seen before. He also did the unthinkable. He left acting and somehow managed to return and come back stronger than ever. Today, we're talking with Tim Lounibos. Tim, how's it going today?
Very good, thank you.
So, Tim, what is your earliest memory of Star Trek?
Oh, wow. I watched it as a young kid, the original Star Trek. My best friend, a guy named Mark Snyder, who lived next door, we were same age, and we used to just eat it up. And the episodes that stick out the strongest for me from back then, and they still remain my favorite, I think, today, are the ones with Abraham Lincoln, Apollo.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And then I always loved triples. I actually had in 8th grade, I got a pet tribble at my first convention. So I had that for years, and then I ended up gifting it to a friend of mine, a classmate, Tim Maloney, who ended up working for NASA, and he was a huge Trekkie. So I it was like maybe 5 years ago or so, I sent it to him.
Oh, wow. Did you ever get to meet Michael Forrest at a convention?
I did not. No, I did not.
Well, hopefully when conventions begin again, and hopefully you'll do one of them at some point too as a signing, I hope you get to actually meet Michael Forrest. I haven't met him myself yet, but he seems like a really great guy.
Yeah. And I am approved to do conventions, and a couple of times I thought I was going to do the Vegas one, but I ended up booking work, so was unavailable.
That's not a bad excuse to not go to Star Trek Vegas if you're working a gig.
Yeah.
So before we start talking about your professional career, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Who were your parents, what they did, and what little Tim wanted to be when he grew up?
Well, it's interesting. My mom, she was actually born in Japan. She actually saw the atom bomb, mushroom cloud, but she was Korean and didn't know it. So the family lived in disguise while my grandfather had a successful business. And then what happened is that when the end of the war, World War II, my mom remembers them listening to the Emperor on the radio, and all the kids were crying, that they had lost and all that stuff. And then my grandfather told them, "Don't worry, we're not Japanese, we're Korean, and we're leaving." So they went back to Korea, to Jeju Island, where she actually became she was the smartest girl on the island, I guess, and so she was designated the flower bearer for General MacArthur when he came, and then she also, as she got older, was a greeter. She was chosen to sort of greet a lot of dignitaries who would visit. And then she met a GI and ended up leaving with him over to here, and he was not a very good husband or father. And fortunately, he left when I was 4. But that's what brought her over here, and that's why I'm here. She is an amazing woman. She's now. She was born in 1933, so what's today? She's going to be 87 in December, and she remarried when I was 8, and he's my dad. And my dad is an attorney, retired. He's actually dealing with dementia, and we think we're in his latter days. But he's been an amazing influence in my life.
So as a kid, did you think you were going to be an actor?
Yeah, growing up, I had very different aspirations. I was always the best athlete in my class, and for a while there, I thought I might be a basketball player, for a profession. I also, before that, thought I was going to be a priest early on, and then hit puberty and realized can't get married, can't have children, not going to happen for me. So,
I guess that happens to a lot of kids that age when they think about that career path.
Yeah. But I was, and I think I had toyed with the idea of being a teacher early on as well, because I just love helping people, and I've always, whenever anyone's in need of help or anything, I'm like the first person there, and I was always like kind of the leader in my class, and so that stuff came naturally. But then when I was in college, I still had no intention whatsoever of taking an acting class, being an actor, or anything like that. But as I was getting near the end, it was in '88, I went to breakfast one morning because I was sort of going through a mini crisis of what do I want to do with my life, as you get close to the end of college. And I saw, at the time, was planning on going to grad school and getting my MBA. And I was planning on being the next AP Giannini because I had a job at Bank of America at the time. And then, but I really sat down at this breakfast thinking, what do I want to do? I knew I was creative. I've always loved to write. My earliest memories are singing to the radio. And I had decided at that point that I was going to put, while I was young, I was going to put the next 5 years into something creative. It was either going to be acting, writing, or singing. And by that end of the breakfast, I decided that singing was out because I had never seen an Asian American successful singer at that point. Writing was out because at the time, my English teacher, who I loved, and I think this was probably ill advice, but he didn't think I should go that route because it's too difficult. In fact, he told the class as a whole, don't become writers. So he goes, write for enjoyment, but not for a profession, because the career, it's too difficult. And then I thought about acting. And I'd never acted before, but I also knew that even though at that point I didn't see any successful, really Asian American male actor. I know James Shigeta had been in Flower Drum Song and things like that. He was a leading man in his time. But I saw that as a future possibility because at that time it was still domestic, but I knew it was going to go global, and I expected it to go global in a big way, and that so much of the population of Earth is Asian, and I figured, yeah, I think I have a shot at this. So I, at that point, enrolled in acting classes, and after 5 years, I was making a living, and sort of that wasn't turning back.
And so, where did you go to acting school?
So in the beginning, I went to Cal, Berkeley, and so that's where I took Drama 10 and 110. Those are beginning and intermediate acting. And then in San Francisco, I started taking class at a place called Jean Shelton Acting School, and she follows sort of what you would think is the method type acting. I went also, there were like different seminars and stuff that were going on up there, acting seminars. And there was a guy that I ended up really hooking up with named Cliff Osmond. And he had probably the most profound impact on me as an actor at that time. And when I came down to LA, I made the decision to come down to LA in the beginning of 90. His wife was an agent, and so she became my first agent. And I continued to study with him. At that time when we were studying together, it was Vince Vaughn was in the class, Jason Scott Lee, a couple others. The guy from Doogie Howser, black guy who was on Doogie Howser, I cannot remember. I think his name is Marcus, but I can't remember his name now. But we all used to hang out. And and Ahmed, who's a wonderful stand-up comic. But those were the times that I was starting.
And what was it about Cliff that was so great for you and so pivotal for your early education in acting?
Well, yeah. In the beginning, you need to understand I was an athlete, and I was extremely competitive. I was also coming up, I alluded to the fact that I did not have a good dad in the beginning, and he was extremely abusive. And so I, from those early days, felt the need to be a perfectionist, and so that I wouldn't get hit. So I beat myself up a lot, and he was someone who did not give. I mean, he's like bigger than me. I was 6'1", little under 6'2", and he was probably around 6'3", 6'4", and he had done so much in his life as an actor. He didn't give me anything. He didn't let me get away with anything. And so it was a combination of, he was the first person to get me to get out of my head, to stop having these explosions in the middle of scenes, because it was not fair to anyone else around me. and that sort of opened up my eyes, because that appealed to the person who wanted to be a teacher and a priest earlier on, that I cared about others. And I hadn't, at that point, was so into my head and myself that I wasn't thinking about how I was affecting others. I was just so pissed off that I felt like I was being pulled out of the scene. And so he was instrumental in grounding me, in getting me to be a really giving and generous actor, and he also taught me the technical aspects very well of acting. And after him was a guy named Sal Romeo, and he was a huge influence on me as well. But it was the same thing, both about grounding me, peeling through the different layers of the onion, having all this other stuff going on underneath that create a full character.
Yeah, it's a good lesson to learn when you're especially early on in the acting world. So I'm hoping some folks listening today who are new to the world as well will use that advice.
Yeah.
So, Tim, do you remember what your first ever professional gig was on a show or a film?
Let's talk about TV, I guess, not industrial videos, because my first gigs were industrial videos.
I'd say that counts. What did you do with those?
Oh, it does. Okay. My first one was an industrial video for, well, actually, oh my God, the very first one was when I was in school at Berkeley. And there was, I can't even remember what it's called. It's like a little medical company. And I did something for them. And it was basically me and my wife and talking about whatever. It had to do with AIDS. And we were talking, and I showed this video to a guy named Ed Hooks, who was one of the seminars that I would go to. And actually, he was wonderful too. But he looked at it, and he couldn't help but laugh. And he goes, "Tim, I'm sorry, but this is not good." I was so ready to have him go, "Hey, great job, Tim." And he goes, "No, you're fine." He goes, "But this is really not good. Don't show this to anyone." And then from there, the first professional industrials was Mervyn's, Office Club, and Hewlett Packard. And those were great experiences for me, because I was getting hands-on learning of being on a set, of understanding where the camera was and where I needed to be, and all of that. All of that I was able to learn before going on to a television show, and I was able to avoid mistakes that an early actor makes, a new actor makes. And then from there, I came down to LA. I did like 6 industrial videos in Northern California, and then I moved to LA, Studio City, and took 6 months before my first job, which was another industrial video. I want to say First Interstate Bank. And then from there, it was, nothing was happening. And, and I remember being, I knew that I had to pay my dues, but when you're going to class and you're working with, you're doing class with people who you see are working, I remember expressing frustration to my teacher at the time, Sal Romeo, and he goes, "Tim, trust me, it's going to happen. You just need to just stay in it." He goes, "You're good, and it's just a matter of more people getting to know you, more casting people getting to know you, and then once you start working, once you get the job and validate yourself, then other jobs will start coming in, because you will be validated as an actor." And he was right. So my very first job, which was another wonderful experience, best first job I could have had, was a small spot on the soap opera Bold and the Beautiful. And I went in. It was at CBS over there on Fairfax and Melrose. And or not Melrose, Beverly and Fairfax. When you first start off with rehearsal, and I remember when I first got in, the woman, her name was Darlene. She was like the matriarch, family matriarch. I remember right off the bat, she was putting me in my place. She was making it clear, "You will not upstage me," even though I only had one line, which was "Yes, ma'am."
That's a very critical line. That could just change the entire outcome of the series.
Yeah. But by the end, she was pinching my cheek and, and all this stuff. And everyone, once they learned this was my first job, it was like everyone was so nice to me and so helpful. And, it was just a great experience. And then from there, I did another soap. And then after that, I started booking some small TV roles and I remember my first small TV role that was more than one day was a thing called Profiles, and that worked for 3 days. And that was another cool experience. And that was with Carrie Moss and Suzanne Plachette and others. And just everything. It becomes it's funny now when we're talking about it, I start remembering those days. But everything always was a stepping stone to something else, and you learned from it and you gained from it and you moved on. But my favorite thing about working in general is the set. It's not being on camera, but being on the set and being around others who are collaborating on this project.
So, Tim, can you paint a picture for us of what it's like to be an Asian American actor in Hollywood in the early 90s?
Sure.
That's the big question.
Yeah, and it was rough. So often, I always say the biggest line I always heard, "We're not going that way." You would never hear that today, but back then that was a common thing. We're not going that way. And I remember all these people, whether it be casting people or other people, peers or what have you, or their representatives. They used to tell me, people would tell me, "Dude, they're talking about you, and it's like any day now you're going to blow up." Well, that never happened, and it was because there was that ceiling. And if 10 years later I'd come along, maybe things have been different. But I was fortunate. I was really fortunate because back then, saying that, I had the negative aspect of not being able to shoot through the roof because of that glass ceiling, but at the same time, I worked a lot. And I know a lot of people who did not work. We were a very close-knit group back then. So you always knew everybody and what everybody was doing, whether that was in front of or behind the camera. And then when I left for that 7 years and came back, it was totally different. I mean, the landscape's totally changed where you can't keep up with how many people are working. But back then, yeah, it was rarely the lead. And if I was the lead, that was for an indie film or something like that. If it was network primetime show, I'd be the guy on, the fifth detective or the partner or something like that. But it was definitely it could be a very frustrating time, but I also made a fairly good living.
I've talked to actors like Alex Datcher, who said like the stereotypical role that female black actors would often be given would be a prostitute, or a lot of black men, if they were larger, would often be just offered the thug role, those kinds of things. And typically there is like a stereotypical role for an Asian man, but we've mentioned how you're not the typical looking Asian man. You're 6'1", you're a big guy, so you got a pretty diverse roles here.
Yeah, and that became it was weird because they weren't going that way for certain parts, but in other parts, he's not Asian enough, or he's not 5'6", and he's not the delivery guy, or he's not the what have you. And I refused to do anything that I felt was ethnically demeaning or stereotypical. And so there were a lot of parts that I did not go for, or refused to accept, or what have you, because I didn't like how it was going. I didn't like where it was, what the characterization was, and so that was limiting to me as well. But so the thing that I was fortunate about is that there was advocacy at that time. There was groups like MANA and East West Players from the Asian American side, and other groups, and then they also banded with Latino groups and African American groups, etc. For this, forcing the networks and the studios. They started feeling the pressure, especially networks, of having to have more inclusion. But back then, it was very much just do this to get them off our backs. So throw in the little guy here, or the not the big roles, the smaller roles. Put some here and there, just so that we can say, "See, we're being diverse now. Get away. Leave us alone. Let us do our thing." Whereas today it's completely different, because they are actively looking for inclusion in their projects, because now it's a money issue. Now they feel like they will bring more eyeballs to their shows. They will have more ticket buyers, etc., because of the fact that you have expanded demographics, which has always been my argument from the beginning, but Hollywood was slow to take that on or to accept that.
So through the 90s, aside from Star Trek, you appeared in plenty of big shows, and that includes Becker, The Pretender, Touched by an Angel, Suddenly Susan, Jag, The West Wing.
Yeah.
But before we get into Trek, I want to talk about a few of these other shows. And the one that I think of the list of things you've been on, the one I watched the most growing up was The Nanny. And you were in season 6. That episode was Making Whoopi. And so your scene in particular, well, on the final version, it's basically shared with Charles Shaughnessy, and you're next to Tom Bergeron, and they're all in the Hollywood Squares set. So I'm just kind of curious, when you guys filmed that, clearly you're in the same spot with Tom Bergeron, but were you actually filming the same day as the other people, the other stars in the show?
Yeah, we were all hanging around.
Really?
We were
Okay.
all oh yeah. So all of those. I think Snoop Dogg was in it. Yeah, we were all hanging out, and some people were inviting me to come over, and to hang out in their rooms or stuff like that. But I forget what it was, but there was a playoff game going on, and so anytime I was not on set, I was sitting in front of a television set watching the game.
Huh.
And I can't even remember what game it was. I just know it was like an important playoff game. So I had my priorities, I guess. But that was a wonderful, fun day of shooting, and that came about. I didn't audition for that. I was doing a play at that time, and it was 4 1-acts, which actually this play, the other great thing about this play that ties into what we were talking about earlier in terms of Star Trek, is that the guy who was Apollo, Michael Forrest.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I have met Michael Forrest. What am I thinking? I was thinking of DeForest Kelly when I heard Forrest. Yeah, Michael Forrest. Yeah, Michael Forrest and I had a great time together. So the thing about Michael Forrest was that he was in this other 1-act that was being directed by a casting director named April Webster, who is also involved in the theater community. And so April's the one who cast me in The Nanny. She just asked, we have this part that opened up. Will you do it? And I said, sure. And so that's how that came about. But Michael Forrest, I did not, when you're doing 1-acts, and you're not in the other person's 1-act, you don't always, you see each other kind of, but you don't hang out or anything. You're concentrating on your own 1-act. And, but then when it came to opening night, I was looking at the program before the show started. And I was looking at the bios of the different actors, and I came across Michael Forrest. And and you understand at this point, Michael Forrest was, I believe, 72. It was 72 or 73. I think he was 72. And he still was like this leading man, carried himself. His carriage was so impressive. And actually the 1-act that he was doing was was sort of a romantic about a relationship. And yeah, he was so impressive. And so I'm reading his bio, and at the very last line, talked about being Apollo in Star Trek. And I'm not someone who gets starstruck or anything like that. But once in a while, like with the mother from Man from Atlantis, when I first met her, I got, oh my God, goosebumps, shiveries, just like freaking out a little bit. Like, this is Apollo. I am with Apollo in this. And so then fast forward, and now it's the final night. And when the show ends, everyone does what's called a strike, where you help take down the set and put things away, et cetera, and basically close up the show. And so I made a beeline so that I would be with Mike, because we were partnering up. So Mike and I worked together all night, and we were using a cart, one of those golf carts, to drive back and forth between the warehouse and the theater. And so we had a great conversation. He told me about his whole career, and he told me how he had made the decision shortly after being Apollo he had been talked into going to Italy to do Westerns, the spaghetti Westerns. And ended up being a really bad decision for him. And then he finally came back when he came back to Hollywood, no one cared about him anymore. No one remembered he didn't have the momentum or anything anymore. So that was kind of sad. But I did ask him, I said, Mike, I go, you're so you seem so fit still and everything. And at that time, I was thinking about, I was feeling like starting to get aches and, feeling the need to take naps at time and stuff like that. I was like going, I noticed a real difference between the 20s and now I'm 30. And is this going to slow down at some point? Does it level off? And he goes, oh, no. It gets worse. Every decade gets much worse. I was like, oh, man.
Well, at least he was
honest.
honest.
Goes, that's why. He goes, I still work out every day. He goes, you have to work out every day. And unfortunately, I haven't followed that advice.
And just real quick, back on the Nanny, it wasn't Snoop Dogg. It was actually Coolio in that episode. And that also had...
Coolio.
Coolio, yeah. And
Coolio, okay.
He also had that same one, Howie Mandel, Caroline Ray, Bruce Vilanch, basically the regulars that were there. So that's a pretty great cast to be around.
I ended up producing an award show later that we used Bruce Vilanch.
Oh, yeah, he sounds pretty... I've heard interviews with him on the Gilbert Gottfried show. I really enjoyed hearing him talk about stuff.
Yeah, interesting guy. But that was a fun shoot.
So another thing that you did that I just found out about, which, to be honest, my brain completely pushed it out of my head, Saved by the Bell, the new class. You were in Season 7. You were Sergeant Meinhardt of the Palisades Police and Fire Academy. And this is basically a spinoff that had Dennis Haskins and Dustin Diamond basically guiding a new crop of hormonal teens into the Bayside High. And you did 3 episodes there when the class went to do some police academy stuff.
Correct.
Did you like your time on that show?
I loved my time on that show. It was just a wonderful experience. It also let me know that I was now one of the older guys, because I was working with all these kids who were, I think, ranged. The youngest guy was around 15, 16 years old. And then it went up to like 23. And I'll never forget sitting at a table with them. The camera changes and you got some time where you're talking and hanging out. And we were talking about music. And I said something about James Taylor. And there was just this blank stare on everyone's face. And at that point, I went, oh, my God. And I go, you guys have never heard of James Taylor? And they're like, no. and then the other thing I remember...
they haven't seen Fire or Rain.
No, not at all. And I remember that one of the days at the end of shooting where I passed, I think it was Anthony in the hallway as, we're leaving. And I go to give the old guy shake, and he goes to bump me give me a fist bump. And then I go to return the fist bump. He's trying to change it to a shake. And then, and then it was just like we passed each other and laughed. And, so, that's where I started to feel like, I'm not the young buck anymore. I'm not the young guy. But that was a wonderful show. It also, I loved Northern Exposure when that show had come out. And that coincided with me coming to Hollywood. And Dana, I can't remember her full name, but she had been on Northern Exposure, had a great role in Northern Exposure, and so they had cast her in this as the cook, and she was great. She was fun to work with, and you could see how everyone, even the producers and stuff, were coming up to her saying thanking her for agreeing to do the show and stuff like that. But the other interesting thing about that, and this is also something about Hollywood, is that they were not renewed, and that was found out while I was working during one of the episodes there.
That's right, yeah, because you were in the last season, I believe.
And so I remember some of the actors, you could see sort of this feeling of desperation that what are we going to do now? What's going to happen? And it's interesting. That's something that happens for, I think, every actor. It depends. Not the stars. They always know there's another gig. But there are other actors who it's always sort of going from show to show. And even if you're a series regular, if you're not the number 1, 2, or 3 person on the show, if you're down the ladder a bit, there's always that fear. You have that sense of security while you're working. But once the job ends, then you start wondering, what's next? Is there going to be a next? And I think that's something that actors always have with them. One of the cast members, I can't remember her name now. She was the Latina gal. She and she was a girl at the time. I think she was a minor still, but she lived in the condominium that I lived in. We did not know that, and then all of a sudden we saw each other and we're like, hey. So.
Oh, that's Samantha Esteban.
Yes, thank you. Little side note.
And I want to add, as we're talking about Tim's career, I'm picking out a lot of really quirky roles, but he has had far more substantial roles in Saved by the Bell, the new class, and we're going to talk about one of those a little bit later on in the show. But yeah, so Saved by the Bell, the new class, it somehow did manage the last 7 seasons, which I can't believe. But you were on one of my other favorite sitcoms that sadly didn't make it past the first, and that was All American Girl.
Oh.
And that was Margaret Cho's vehicle, which also had Clyde Kasatsu, Jody Long, B.D. Wong, and the amazing Amy Hill. So that's a lot of royalty right there.
Right.
And you were part of the pilot of that series, and you got to spend some
Yes,
one-on-one
I
time
was.
with Margaret Cho, along with Maggie Corman and Judy Gold. And yeah, you can tell I'm actually a pretty big legit fan of the show. But I'm like the only All American Girl fan out there.
You know, when they first were casting that show, I wasn't around. I was working on a movie of the week in North Carolina, and called Leave of Absence. And so they had already cast all that. That part was cast. Everything was cast. I came back at some point, and I think it was probably a few weeks before the pilot was going to air. And Garrett Wang, who was also an All-American Girl, but obviously, as you know, Harry Kim from Star Trek Voyager, he gives me a call. And I say, hey, what's up? And we were talking and stuff. And he goes, you know All American Girl? And I go, yeah. And he goes, I played this part in the pilot, and but they now want to use me in another episode as her boyfriend. And I go, yeah. He goes, so they asked me, do I know anyone who they could just use to replace him in the pilot? And I said, is it a guest star? And then there's like this huge pause. Garrett and I, who are great friends, have had these moments in our acting relationship where there have been some uncomfortable moments that we had to work through when we were younger. And he goes, I don't know. And I go, well, I can only do it if it's a guest star, because at that point I had gotten these other things under my belt, and I was now moving on. I was not going to do any more co-stars, etc. And though Amy Hill, who you talked about, she once said, yeah, I remember I knew someone who was like that, and I don't know what he's doing now. But
Amy Hill's the best.
Anyway, yeah, because Clyde, who's also that ended that taping that night. I'm going stream of consciousness now, but I remember him telling me a story about, as an Asian American male actor, you never get momentum. So you cannot keep saying no to things. And I'll never forget that. But anyway, we ended up hanging up after a few more conversation about that, because I said, well, thank you, but no. And so then the next day, fast forward, and he was pissed. He was so angry that he was giving me this bone, and I was saying no. And so then my agent called me the next day and said, and who's my manager now, actually, but he said, hey, Tim, he goes, All American Girl wants to see you for pilot. And I go, oh, yeah, and yeah, I already told, I was asked about that yesterday. I said no. And he goes, why? And I told him why. I didn't feel it was big enough. And he says, well, he goes, this has the potential to recur. It could be a recurring role. I go, oh, well, okay, if it can be a recurring role, then sure. And so then I went in for it, and I'll never forget, I'm sitting in the room to meet the casting person, who is Nikki Valco, someone who would end up casting me a lot in my career back then. And I'm seeing these two actors across. I recognize Steve Park from, what was the show called, the variety show, the Wayans Brothers?
Talking about In Living Color.
In Living Color, thank you. So I recognize Steve from that. And then another guy. And years later, I would find out that Steve leaned over to this other guy, Charles Chen, saying, who's that guy? Because I was still new to a lot of people. And he goes, oh, he's just some modeling actor hack. So I was just like, wow. But anyway, I went in for that. I went in to read for Nikki Valco, and she said, after I did the scene, she goes, where were you when we were originally casting the show? And I said, oh, I was in shooting a movie of the week in North Carolina. And she went, okay. And then she asked if I'd stay for producers, and I said, sure. And so then I ended up getting the part, and that was wonderful too, because since I was doing the part, it was pickup. So I was working with actors who were doing a different episode. And someone who I'd eventually work with a couple more times, Sab Shimono, was working that episode. And it was great to work with him. And then, I became friends with everyone from that show. That was sort of the original of me starting to build bonds with the community. And so that too was a great experience. It was unfortunate. I felt that show was really poorly written, that they had really limited Margaret, and also the community was so divisive and wasn't looking at the bigger picture of how to make the show better. They were just there to castigate it, the writing and stuff. And, the nation was ready to see Asian Americans at that point, because that pilot was ranked 5th in the Nielsen ratings that week.
Like, I honestly think that show was just too soon. Like if it had been out 5 more years when it came out, I think it would have done amazing. At that point, I just don't think the country knew what to do with it.
Well, I tell you though, I think it still would have done well. It still could have been like an Asian American have the same success as, say, the Cosby Show or something, if the writing was right. I just don't feel the writing was right, and so then it wasn't. People became disinterested. It didn't hook him in. I think it was right. And then that doomed it. One more thing, talking about Asian American, being an Asian American actor in the 90s, that show alone just really hurt us big time, because that was proof to the networks that, nope, country's not ready to see Asian Americans. We don't need to do Asian American shows. Which
is horrible. So it would be like, what, another decade, or if not 2, until we actually got fresh off the boat, I guess.
Yeah.
Which I can't really think of too many other Asian leading shows at this point still that are on TV.
One thing I'm worried about too is that we've had all this success that has been occurring, and I feel like the dam is busted, so you're not pulling it back, especially when we have all these outlets for content. But I did get nervous at first when the virus hit, and thinking, oh no, now everyone's, it's yellow fever again. Everyone's banging on the Chinese and all this stuff, and it's only going to affect us. But I realize now, no, it's not. That's just not going to happen. The dam is busted, and people want to see contents of all type, and people want to see society, the society that they see on an everyday basis. They want that reflected in what they're watching on the screen.
Trek Untold will return momentarily. Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. If you're a Star Trek cosplayer looking for props, or a toy collector looking to spice up your shelves, Triple Fiction Productions has you covered. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. You can expect the same amount of care and attention to detail in any of the items in their catalog, whether it's a prop replica for use in a fan film, or a part of a cosplay, or accessories and playsets for figures from Playmates, Migos, or Diamond Select. Own your very own tricorder or phaser rifle with working lights, the bridge of the Enterprise E for your Playmates figures, or any other item from countless species and ships from the Star Trek universe. All products are 3D printed in the USA and are constantly evolving and improving based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit them at triple-fictionproductions.net or on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hi, my name is Walker Brandt, and I was privileged to play the role of Cadet Hajar in the episode The First Duty, Star Trek The Next Generation. I was also a guest on Trek Untold a few months ago, and during my interview with Matt, I introduced my new book, Awaken, Discovering Yourself Through the Light of Your Innocence. The dedication in Awaken reads to the human spirit, the final frontier within. I'm a Trekkie, I'm a fan, and I have always believed that the final frontier is our unlimited imagination. And the reason I wrote my book is to support the reader, to always remember that when you combine your unlimited imagination with your innocence, that playfulness as a child where you had no fear about the unknown. In fact, every single day you woke up into the unknown and you wanted to explore. That's been my journey, and that's how I believe that we change our reality for the better together, because we're all creators and we're all explorers. So I ask you, what excites you? How will you expand and go where you've never been before? What steps will you take to embrace the unknown? So Awaken, Discovering Yourself Through the Light of Your Innocence, is there to support the reader, to share my journey, to let you know you're not alone, to let you know that if you've been through challenges and difficulties and times in your life where you felt like you just couldn't go on, I've been there with you. And this book is there for you to encourage you to keep getting back up and moving forward into the adventure. So I hope you have a chance to read it. It's titled Awaken, Discovering Yourself Through the Light of Your Innocence, and it's available on Amazon. And it's a #1 international bestseller. So I hope you get a chance to get on that journey with me. And if you'd like to reach out to me, you can find me at walkerbrandt.com or on my social media, Facebook, Instagram. Thanks so much, and I hope we get a chance to connect.
We now return to Trek Untold.
So Tim, let's beam up now into our Star Trek discussion. You were cast in the Season 7 episode Eye of the Beholder as Lieutenant Daniel Kwan. So tell us how you got cast for Star Trek The Next Generation.
Well, it's funny because I was a huge Trekkie and not what we called at the time a Trekker, which was for Star Trek Next Generation. I boycotted Star Trek Next Generation for a long time. And, whenever someone would say, no, Tim, it's actually no, I'm not going to watch it. There is one Kirk, Spock, all of that. And so I got sick. I had a really bad case of the flu. And my girlfriend at the time was taking care of me. And I knew all this time that she was big into the Next Generation, TNG. And she had these VHS tapes of like all these episodes. So I said, okay, I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to watch it. And, obviously, first episode, I got hooked in. And I watched all those episodes that weekend. And then I'm like, I need to be on this show. And I knew it was the 7th season. I looked that up and saw it was 7th season. I'm like, I've got to get on this show. The next day, Monday, I get a call from my agent saying I had an audition for Eye of the Beholder for Star Trek Next Generation. I was like, sweet, okay. And so I go in and, did my thing and got the job. And that was an amazing experience because for Next Generation, there's a guy, Michael Westmore, who was like, they called him the king. And the Westmore family, it's really interesting. But if you look at any old movie, or most of them, you'll always see a Westmore name for makeup.
Yeah, the Westmores are legendary.
Yeah, they're like first family of makeup. And I actually had some Westmore who did my makeup on a short film, way back when. And at times, oh, sweet, you're a Westmore, and who knows where she is right now. I'm sure she's doing fine. But yeah, it was great meeting Michael Westmore and great going in. And, I was going in like at 4 a.m. And so I'd be like one of 3 cars on the lot, and just driving in and walking by the big, there's like this huge outdoor screen thing that's used, like concrete screen or something that is used for like Jaws and stuff like that. And so anyway, you'd walk in and I'd get in and I'd be in the chair for like 3.5, 4 hours for makeup. And that alone was so well worth getting that job. The thing about Star Trek Next Generation, maybe all the Star Treks, I'm not sure, but all the aliens were designated by different foreheads pretty much. And so, so you'd see all these different foreheads and stuff that were being created, but they were kind enough because one of the makeup people, I said, hey, can I keep this? And, oh, no, we're not supposed to do that. And I was like, okay, I just thought for my first guest star, because that was my first guest star role. And so they said, oh, do not tell anyone. And then just like split me my forehead. And it's still mostly intact, but I dare not touch it, I think, these days now, because it's starting to get a little decrepit.
And how long did the makeup take for that role? 3.5
to 4 hours I'd be doing it. And actually one day I went on and it was for shooting if you watch the episode, there's a scene where they're looking back after I died and they're looking at on the screen, I'm talking about something. And so I was shooting that stuff that day. So literally, almost 4 hours of makeup and hair, go on the set, and they're waiting for me, bang it out in like 2 takes, come back. It's literally 15 minutes later. And the makeup person's looking at me walking into the trailer, and she goes, "No, you're not." And I go, "Yeah, I'm sorry, we're done." And she's like, "Oh my God." So, and that was 3 days of work for that part. So it was a fun 3 days. And, and it's great, when you grow up, like I said before, I'm not starstruck or anything like that. But when I am able to experience either sets or people that I watched as a kid, and next year on it or meeting the person, that stuff has always been very cool to me. Unless, of course, in terms of the person, if they turn out to be a jerk, then you're like, oh, that sucks. But and that does happen. And but yeah, I love Star Trek. Oh, and I'll never forget. So when I was in the trailer, they needed me right away for something, and so I was waiting, and I was having an issue. Oh, and I think this is why I came into the trailer. I was having an issue with my boot, and I wasn't sure how to tie it or something, and I'll never forget Gates McFadden just coming over and go, "Hey, let me help you with that." And so here's Gates McFadden kneeling down to take care of my boot, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy." But they were so nice, LeVar Burton was extremely friendly. Everyone was cool. The unfortunate thing for me is, like, I never got to meet the captain. So
No.
That would have been the icing on the cake. But Marina Sirtis and I had the same manager, so I used to have dinners and stuff with her. So that was always fun too. She's like hanging out with one of the boys, essentially.
So I think one of the unique things about this episode, Eye of the Beholder, is that the role was always meant to be Asian. It was always Lieutenant Daniel Kwan, which, on TNG, you had Patty Yasutake as Ogawa, and that was pretty much the only other Asian character that was a regular or recurring part in the show. So yeah, it's just pretty interesting to see that, that was actually always meant to be someone that was an Asian character in this universe.
Yeah, and not only Asian, but mixed race.
Yeah.
So human alien mix. And so I thought that was very cool also. And also the other half of me, the alien half of me, was Napien. And I learned that up to that point, Napiens had only been extras in the shows. So this was the first time they were seeing a Napien character in a principal role. It was also the first time the cell tube was being seen.
Yeah, this was the first time that the control room of the nacelle tubes were ever shown, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And again, you being an original Trek fan, what did you think of just these Next Generation sets?
It's crazy. It was like, granted, it doesn't look the same as you see on the screen. But it's still very cool walking around with different things, pressing buttons that you're not supposed to press, and my hat's off to all set designers, because it's so cool what they do. And, it really helps in terms of acting, because it puts you in the world. If you work on something where you don't get all of that, then you really have to make sure you're grounded in what you're doing as an actor. But when you have this world that's created by set designers, it just enhances everything, and you're able to just immerse yourself.
So your scene is basically the show open, and spoiler alert, it's where Lieutenant Kwan kills himself. And you share that scene with Jonathan Frakes, Michael Dorn, and Nancy Harewood as Lieutenant Nara. So what do you remember about filming that pretty emotionally draining scene? I would imagine it would be emotionally draining to do something like that.
Yeah, it's funny because the first thing that was funny about that is I'm not doing the stunt work. I'm not jumping in. So they found a stunt guy, and they were having a hard time finding a stunt guy that was my size, that was Asian American. And so they ended up finding this guy. I can't remember his name right now. We had a nice talk and stuff, but he was like 20 years older than me. I was like, how's this gonna work? But obviously they know how to make it work. And but watching him jump, and I can't imagine, especially as I got older, knowing how my body was, I can't imagine what his body was taking, how he did not mess up his back, and I'm sure he was feeling it the next day. But this guy had to keep jumping and jumping and hitting these mats a certain way. At one point, he hit it at a bad angle, and it's again, another aspect. All these things that go into creating a project, so many people focus on what's on camera, the actors, whatever, but none of this would be cool without having the rest of the team involved in creating it. And stunt people, and they never have like awards and stuff for stunt people, it seems like, and they deserve it. I mean, it's amazing what stunt people do.
Yeah, no one actually seems to know the name of that stunt person, but I mean, I gotta tell you, watching him jump, it was like watching American Gladiators. He was going for it.
Yeah, I think his first name's Michael. I actually could get that name. Maybe I'll tweet that out to you or something. But I know I have the paperwork. I'm pretty sure I have his name.
That'd be great, yeah, because on Memory Alpha, which is where all the Star Trek information is held, they don't even know who that is. So yeah, that'd be great to actually get him and to know, make sure that he's recognized for his work.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the emotional aspect of it, yeah, it's something, and this is just in general. Like even just for this audition that I was taping yesterday, which was really emotional, it puts you in that place. You definitely are affected by it. But the thing that I do, and I think other actors do, not all actors do it, but for me, I also am able to compartmentalize. So once I'm done, then I let it go, and we got to go to the next scene, which might be, shiny, smiling, happy scene. So you can't carry that into that scene. So you learn to be able to shut it off. But when you're in it, you are in it, and you make yourself completely vulnerable to it. So, yeah, it was cool.
So you primarily are sharing the screen with Jonathan Frakes. He's trying to stop you from jumping in. How'd you like working with Jonathan?
Jonathan was great. He was very professional and friendly. It wasn't like he wasn't going to make me his best buddy or anything like that. But he was completely fine to work with. I don't think he would have been bending down to tie my shoe though. But I really enjoyed it. Again, it's one of those things where I literally had just been watching him that weekend, and so I appreciated what he did and what he meant to the show. And so anything like that, it's enjoyable to work with the people that mean that are that important to a show.
So this episode was directed by Cliff Bole. He had been directing Next Generation episodes for many, many, many years at this point. Did he give you much direction for your scenes?
I liked working with Cliff. I remember him being very friendly and very sort of thoughtful. And, he basically, what he did is he just sort of laid things out for me, but he pretty much let me do what I did. And then he might, whisper something into my ear, a little adjustment or something like that. And then we do another take. I don't have any memories of him being too invasive or anything like that, or he pretty much just let me do my thing and then made minor adjustments here and there. It's funny. I got to tell you, I can hear his voice actually, the tone and timbre of it. So that's interesting.
He's made quite an impression, I guess. Now, was Cliff there when you filmed the personal logs? Because I've heard typically when they do those, usually it's like the second AD that comes in to direct the actor for that.
No, Cliff was there. Cliff was always there when I worked. Yeah.
Okay. Now, this being the final season, and your episode aired the 18th out of 26, so you're fairly close to the end, but, how is the environment on set considering that this is the final season and it's fairly close to the wrap?
It's interesting. Like I talked about Saved by the Bell in terms of how they were in that final season. Nothing like that with Star Trek. It was a professional set that just did its thing. Everyone was doing their thing. I don't even recall hearing anyone talk about that. They were just doing their thing.
Now, did you watch the episode when it first aired on TV?
Yes, I did. I watched it with a few friends. My best friend had a business meeting down in LA. He was up in San Francisco and he came down to LA, and so we actually were able to get together. I got together at his hotel, and we watched it there with another friend. And then I'll never forget, right after I jump and commit suicide, my phone started ringing, and my brother goes, "Tim, it's Mike. You gotta talk to your niece." And I'm like, "What's up?" And and she was my goddaughter, Nicolette. She was like the first, grandchild in the family. And I go, "What's up?" She thinks you're dead. I'm like, "Oh." And so apparently he I get on the phone. I go, "Honey, I'm here. It's all right. It's all pretend. I was just playing." "Just playing?" And I go, yeah, it was just playing. It's like playing pretend. Oh, okay. And then I find out later when they were watching it, Mike goes, "There's Uncle Tim. Uncle Tim? Yeah, that's Uncle Tim. You know that." And she said, "Uncle Tim." I jump, and she's like, "Uncle Tim is dead." so yeah, mini crisis, but we took care of it.
Oh, that sounds like a pretty good compliment, though, if you were that convincing.
Well, I think she was like 3 or 4 years old at the time.
I'd still take it.
Yeah. Thank you.
So this episode of Star Trek The Next Generation was not your only appearance in the franchise. You returned to do one of the Star Trek video games. You were in Star Trek Away Team in 2001 as the voice of Vin Asunder. So how did you end up back in Star Trek doing voiceover work? Because I know your career actually has had some VO work on it.
Yeah, well, I think that came through my commercial agent. Did it? Maybe not. Maybe they called me in through my theatrical agent for that one. That was in the beginning when video games were starting to become, they saw the potential for video games starting to become big. So I went on a few auditions for video games, and this happened to be one of them. And it was the same casting people as that I had met before. It was, Ron Surma was the assistant or the associate, and Junie Lowry Johnson. So it was Junie Lowry Johnson and Ron Surma, and they called me in for it, and I got the part. So pretty uneventful in terms of how I got the part. And then I remember, though, that was the first time after laying down the voice tracks, because when you do video games, it's not like you're around everyone else. At least it wasn't when I was working on video games. I was in a booth and I had my line, and the director would tell me the scenario, and then I would do my line. And then that was the very first time that I had been interviewed for something. So after, in terms of acting. So after we were done, I went into another room and did what would be now a common special feature at the end of a DVD interview with them. And it'd be interesting to see what I had said. I don't even remember what I talked about, really. And I can't play that game. I never played the game all the way through, so I actually, to this day, have never heard of what I sound like as Vin Asunder.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, because I was curious, if you remember anything about the part itself or how the game was.
Yeah, I just remember in the beginning, because I have the game, and I didn't grow up a gamer or anything, so I had put it in my computer, and I started to play, and the team enters this facility, and then I could never get past that facility, and I just gave up. So I said, well, I just will not know what my character does, what happens, what I look like or anything. But now I do know what my character looks like, from the internet. But I still have not heard at all what I sound like. I'm actually right now trying to get the voice tracks lifted up from someone, if they can do it.
All right, well, hopefully you can get those.
Yeah.
So you have one final role in something Star Trek related. It's not exactly Star Trek, but it is Star Trek related. And this one is very much forgotten about, and it's also very finger-licking good.
Yeah.
You were in a KFC commercial where you played Lieutenant Sulu on the bridge of the original Enterprise, and the crew is trying to get some fried chicken for Captain Kirk. This is like one of the craziest commercials ever. You got to tell me something about this craziness.
Yeah, this was an amazing experience, and not because it was KFC or anything, but because it was Star Trek, and it was one of my first jobs, actually. It was my very first commercial, and the reason why it was little known is because it was a worldwide buyout, which means that it plays internationally but did not play in the United States. I went in for that audition. We did our thing and stuff, and then I haven't heard about it or anything. And then my girlfriend at the time says, "Oh, I'm going in for this audition," and it turns out to be the exact same character that I had read for. And I was like, well, that's weird, because at the time we don't know what we're going in for. We're just reading parts and stuff, And so then find out that I get the part, and I do it, and that alone is an amazing experience, because it was the very first time. It was celebrating the 25th anniversary of the original cast, and it was the first time that the set designer that had designed and built the original Star Trek bridge was doing it again for this commercial. And so that was so cool for someone like me. And then we were given the voice recordings, and so I knew I was doing Sulu, and I had all these different tracks that George laid out, and so I was learning them, and because I knew that I would be mouthing them, and then on top of that, I have to go in for makeup and this was the very first time I was having this happen, where they put the plaster on your face, and they're making prosthetics so that they can get me to look like George as much as possible. My makeup effects guy is a guy named Matthew Mungle, who was an Oscar-winning makeup guy, and he was great. We actually had, at the time, I'd been doing a part as a serial killer for stage, and so I had done a lot of reading and research on that. And it turns out that he was sort of a nut about that stuff too, and so we found a common bond in terms of that, in terms of talking about stuff. And he later on, when I had a theater company, I would sometimes go to him and say, "Hey, do you have this, or can I get this?" So we kept a mini relationship like that. But then also the DP was Oscar-winning guy. He had done. I think the movie he had done just before then was a Clint Eastwood movie where he's the Secret Service guy in the Line of Fire. And so it was just like, wow, it's like all this talent. That's where I first learned how commercials, they would hire these big time directors and crew and stuff. And those people loved it because it was good money and it was something that they could do in between their other jobs.
Yeah, and it's a really, honestly, I feel weird saying this, but it's a really gorgeous looking commercial. Just the prosthetics are so convincing, and the set design is just beautiful. It almost looks better than the original Enterprise, as bizarre as it is.
Yeah, and it's so fun
good.
because I think, and it's great and it's so fun, and I think a testament to that is how people now watch it. People are still watching it and commenting on it, and have a good time. It's fun to watch. And the guy who played Kirk needed very little prosthetics. He really, really did look like William Shatner.
And now for the voices, you guys are basically being dubbed over. Was that the original cast actually providing their voices?
It was.
Wow.
It was all the original cast. And actually, I saw a tweet today. Someone said, "Where was Spock?" And I tweeted back and go, "Yeah, Leonard Nimoy didn't want to do it. So since they didn't have his voice, they didn't have his character on in the show, in the commercial."
Now, did you ever get to meet George Takei? Because I'd love to know what he actually thought about your voice, or I'd love to know what he thought about your portrayal of Sulu.
Like I said before, especially back then, the community was very close knit. So I actually got to know George very well. I think we did some panel discussions together, and then my wife acted with him at one point, and I've had many meetings with George, but that was the first time I was meeting him back then. And I remember when I was first going to some type of benefit or something in the Asian American community. That's where I first met him, and he was talking up on stage. Oh, we were sitting at the same table, and so I let him know I'm the guy who did that commercial. And he's, so when he was on stage, he goes, "And here's the younger version of me down there." And so, but he was always a lot of fun. Oh my. But yeah, great guy. One more thing about George is I'll never forget doing a panel with him once, and then we walked together to the parking lot, and it was there he told me the story of being in an internment camp growing up with his family, and talking about his mom. So I always have, that's always a special memory I have of him.
Did you ever get to see Allegiance?
Yeah. I saw it. It was a Fathom screening. I didn't see it live. Oh, I did see it live with a different cast, but the one I really liked was the one on film that they filmed from, I guess, Broadway. Another good friend of mine was in that, Lea Salonga, and it was wonderful to watch her too. But yeah, I quite enjoyed it. I know that story very well. My wife is Japanese American, so I first learned about the internment experience from her aunt and uncles.
Now, one final question about that KFC commercial, because you were very convincing when you're eating that piece of fried chicken. Was it actually real fried chicken they gave you, or was it just some piece of like stunt rubber that was painted up?
No, no, it was real. I don't recall if it was warmed up because I know there was chicken that was sitting out there for a long time. But and it was, I didn't have to do too many eating takes. I did feel sorry for the actor who played Captain Kirk, because I remember one take in particular that he had to do like 26 times because he wasn't getting the line just right how they wanted it. So he had to keep doing it, and so he had to keep eating that chicken. And I know what it's like. I've done that in other scenes. I once had to eat a bunch of cold McDonald's French fries over and over again, and that was brutal.
I mean,
but
even those warm are brutal.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, I can't take credit for discovering this beautiful mess of a commercial. So shout out to the All the Asians on Star Trek podcast. That's how I found out about it. So go check them out also.
Nice.
But aside from Trek and everything else we talked about today, as you've alluded to in this interview, you ultimately decided to leave acting in, I think it was 2010, right?
Yeah. It was end of 2009.
So what was it that made you want to leave for good from acting?
It was the reality. Like it touches upon when you were asking me how was it to be an Asian American actor in the 90s. And so, because there was that ceiling, I was never able to get above like guest stars or, doing good parts in indie films. And so by the time the 2000s hit, getting in that 2007, 2008, 2009 period, it became brutal because now I was also not the young buck anymore. But at the same time, I wasn't being seen as an older character. And so I was in what one executive at the time, who was a friend of mine, said the tweener stage. And the tweener stage is like death for an actor because we need to make money. And if we haven't been a series regular and we don't have that cash stocked away, it's very difficult. I was the main breadwinner in our household at the time. And so to raise a family of what became four was not sustainable with the career, with how my career was going. And so it was so wild because I remember other actors, any actor knows a number of actors that they've befriended who you see from time to time leave the industry because they have to go get a regular job and, they've given up. I never saw myself as someone who would have to do that. I always saw myself as someone that was going to find much success in this industry. And, but I was hit with the reality that I have a family and that's my number one priority. And so that's why I left. I surprised so many people when I said I was leaving. I mean, it really surprised people that I was leaving. And when I left, I cut it cold clean. I mean, it's just like how I said I can compartmentalize for other things. I compartmentalized in terms of that. I had that career. I'm now moving on to a new career. And I'm going to do this for being a good husband and a good father. And that's what I did. And, you say that, you're going to do that. And it's like, okay, what am I going to get with my resume? It's like, who cares that I went to Cal? It's like, if I don't have any experience in any of these industries. So I went to Screen Actors Guild, and they have a career counseling center. So they were a huge help for me. And we started talking about what I have done, and they helped me to create what they called a functional resume. And that basically showed your transferable skill sets for other things. And at the same time, I put the word out to a few friends, that if you see anything, please let me know. And one of them ended up seeing a job position open up. It was for marketing manager of East-West Players. And they were the nation's number one Asian American theater. They're the longest continuously running theater of color. And they were established in 1965 by Mako and Sunteko and others. And I was fortunate. I wasn't the actor who all he did was acting. I ran a theater. I founded a theater company with others and helped to run it. And so I had the administrative skill set from that. And I produced a couple of award shows and stuff. So I submitted for it, got the call from a guy named Tim Dang, and we had a phone conversation. And it was supposed to be like 10 minutes, ended up going for about 40 minutes. And he kept saying, I got other people waiting for me to call them, but in that conversation at some point, he said, why are you going for the marketing position? And I said, well, because at Lodestone, that was really a specialty of mine. I handled all of our marketing. And he said, because we have another position opening, and that's for the business administrator. And he goes, and I think you would be able to do that. And I said, really? I said, well, I don't really have the resume for that, and I'm sure you have a lot of people, up for that. And he goes, yeah, I do, but I also know that, I know Lodestone, and I know what you did, and it's not like I'm leaving. I'll be here, so I'll be able to help. And so fast forward, I said I'd throw my hat in for both, and I ended up becoming their business administrator. And I did that for 2.5 years, averaged, 90-hour weeks if you include the commute from where I live near Magic Mountain all the way to downtown every day. And that ended up becoming unsustainable, and I loved doing what I did. I was stimulated. I remember the day after I accepted the position, I get a call from my agent, my ex-agent at this point, saying Hawaii Five-0 wants to see you for this. They're doing a series, and one of the regulars, they want to see you for a regular part. It's what Daniel Day Kim ended up doing. And I said no. And they go, Tim, it's a series regular. And I go, yeah, but I just made a commitment to this organization. I just accepted the position on condition that I was leaving acting. I'm not gonna leave them in the loop. So that's when my ex-agent, he never called me again. But then I did that. It became unsustainable. I left, and then I thought I was coming back into acting at that point, but ended up going for another job at Valley Performing Arts Center and worked there for another 4 years. And then we decided it was time for me to return.
And what was the role that brought you back?
When I decided to come back, the first thing I thought of was, I have to get representation. And so I thought commercial agent be quick and easy, probably, if my old agent is still viable and they take me back. And they were good. I looked them up, and they were still one of the top agencies. And so I sent an email saying, subject Tim Lounibos, and then the message was, will you have me back? And I got a call like 20 seconds later. My phone's ringing, and she goes, Tim, this is Pat Brannon. I'm on vacation, but does a bear shit in the woods? I said, well, okay. And so she said, we have a lot to talk about because things have drastically changed since you were here before, and we'll do that next week. And then that's how it all started. I signed with them. The day after I signed, I get an email that Sheila Guthrie wants to see me for Young and the Restless. It's not commercial, but did I want to go in? My first reaction was I can't, because I'm still finishing out my job. I had 3 days left at that position, and then I realized the error of that thinking and went in, and I ended up getting it. And then I booked. I think I booked my first 8 parts when I returned. And that I didn't know when I was coming back, will I even be relevant anymore? Will I be viable? I had no idea. I was just jumping off the cliff and seeing what was going to happen. And thankfully, it happened in a good way.
Yeah, it's definitely worked out, because since then you've gone on to do now Criminal Minds, NCIS, Hawaii Five-0, and Bosch, where you had a recurring role as Ed Sung.
Yep.
So I mean, what's it like now being back though? Since your your agent did say that things have changed, what is different now?
Oh, well, now the difference is the virus. So.
Oh yeah, this very moment,
Everything's been on hold for the last 7 months.
Let's say pre-virus, before the entire world went to the trash.
Yeah, before the world went trash. I also did this Apple commercial, which I found out, wow, and it's still good money in national network commercials. That Apple commercial was better to me in terms of, or I should say better to my family, than the 4 or 5 episodes of Bosch, NCIS, Hawaii Five-0 put together. And that was eye-opening to me. But it's been wonderful. It's still the same boat, Like when I came back, I wasn't sure though what was I going to play. what were they going to see me at? And that was a transition that was a little crazy at first because, the old casting people who knew me, who were calling me back in, they had to also sort of work through that, because I think in their heads they were still thinking of the guy that left, who was, a more, leading man type maybe. And now I'm not that guy. I'm more of a character actor type guy, I think. But it's been very good. I've been very fortunate. Once again, I come back and I start working, and I feel very appreciative of that. But at the same time, it's I'm not necessarily going out a lot for the series regulars roles or anything, because now I've aged myself out of that. You got the young bucks, and I'd be happy to be their dads or their teachers or coaches or what have you. And then some of the older guys, there's already people that are established there and stuff. So it's sort of working my way through that again. But I think what's going to happen is I'm going to just have to create some stuff that I work in, and I'm working with a buddy right now. We're working on a concept and going to write a pilot and outline other episodes and start shopping that around, I think.
So your journey in acting in Hollywood is very unique. I mean, you basically kind of ignored some stereotypes in some ways because your look was so different. You left acting and then you came back to it. It's been quite a ride for you. So I'm just wondering, what do you feel has been the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself and about your skills through this journey, through this road you've had?
Well, I think number one, and this is actually not something that has changed, though it has maybe been enhanced with life experience and wisdom gained from that life experience, is that it's just important to be true to yourself and to be respectful to others, and to do your frickin' job. I mean, you're hired to do something, so make sure you're prepared for it. Do the work that gets you the job, and then do the work that ensures success with that job, because those people will always be hired back. My main thing is I love being with people. I respect everyone until they do something that betrays that respect, and so until something like that happens, I'm going to look you in the eye, thank you, and can I help in any way, what have you. And everyone, when you work with others like that, they too appreciate that, and you tend to be reciprocated with it. Not all the time, but most of the time. And people remember, people like to work with people whom they like, and if you just are a good guy, people, when you're on a hectic set and stuff, people prefer that as opposed to someone else who's just a jerk or always trying to get attention or always being way over the top opportunistic. And my family's number one. Above all, my family is number one. So, even right now when I'm starting to go up for these parts again, it's things have totally changed too in terms of that, because now it's all about self-taping from home. You're not going into offices right now or anything. And but there's that part of me that's a little leery, like, yeah, I expect that if there's any place that's going to be safe to work, it's on a set that, they're really going to go over the top in terms of sanitizing, social distancing, all that stuff. But I don't want to bring anything home to my wife, or my kids. And but especially I think my wife, for some reason, because that fear of taking my kids' mother away from them and taking life away from my wife is just unbearable to think about. So I'm wrestling with that right now. But she's given me her blessing to work again. So we'll see. But my family's number one. Always will be.
So Tim, what is the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
The best part about being part of the Star Trek universe is the community and the being a part of a cultural, iconic universe, which it truly is. And those things are special. And in terms of community, social media has been amazing in terms of that. I'm always, to this day, I still get people that are sending me messages or tweeting or putting something on Instagram or whatever regarding my character. And the other aspect of that community are the conventions. I did go to a couple of conventions with Garrett Wang, and it was amazing, and one was in Germany and one was over in Massachusetts. But, this is a universe that has provided us an escape for so many people. It's something that when everything is going on here in real life, and sometimes it involves headaches or misfortune or just that daily grind, this provides a whole other area to escape to and to enjoy and interact with others who are doing the same thing and who all share that same passion. That's what I enjoy.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time today. It's been really interesting conversation to have with you, and definitely a lot of stuff that we've heard from you that we haven't heard before from other folks, because this really is the first time we've really gotten a taste of the Asian American diaspora in Star Trek and acting. So thank you for being so open with us and just telling us your story.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks for reaching out. And I think, of all the interviews I've done, a lot of them also I did with Bosch and stuff like that, no one has ever asked me about Saved by the Bell, the new class.
Well, I'm honored to be the first.
Yes. All right, man. I'll talk to you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.
That was our discussion with Tim Lounibos, an actor that's proved you can reinvent yourself in this industry and that you can fight back against stereotypes when it comes to casting. It's frequent these days to hear pundits argue that the job should go to the quote-unquote best person, and quote-unquote woke casting is just a stunt. But really, speak to folks like Tim who are proof that the best person doesn't always get the job when the show decides to go in that infamous other direction. We've heard it on this show before too, so it's a shared experience across Hollywood, and one that is getting slowly better over time from what we're hearing, but there is still a lot of work to do. And this isn't just some kumbaya nonsense we're spewing here today. The reality is our world is constantly changing, and every human being deserves to be seen and valued as a contributor to our society. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations isn't just a silly slogan to put on a Star Trek t-shirt. It's what makes our world great, and especially what makes the Star Trek fandom so great. And once again, I do want to stress that today we did spend a lot of time talking about Tim's comedic roles, but he has had plenty more dramatic parts. It's just that the nature of the show, we tend to talk about sitcoms more than the serious things. The episode Eye of the Beholder is probably best known not for the mystery surrounding the A-plot of the show, but the intertwined B-plot, which is the official start of Deanna Troi and Worf's relationship. The two began courting earlier in that season, starting in the episode Parallels, but according to writer Brandon Braga, the hints started coming in during Season 5. It was originally meant to just be a joke, but as the creative team pondered on it more, they decided it was a good idea to pursue since Marina and Michael had such good chemistry on set. Jonathan Frakes, of course, did not approve of the concept at the time, and there was some fan backlash too. However, Riker and Troi did finally get together in Star Trek Insurrection, they married in Nemesis, and then had children by the time we saw them return in Star Trek Picard. And now as for Worf, well, he met Jadzia Dax on Deep Space Nine, but that's a story for another day. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Trek Untold. Please make sure you follow us on social media to see all of our memes and daily guest updates. And who knows what else, because you never know what pops up on our pages. All you have to do is look for Trek Untold on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you think about this week's episode. If you'd like to support this podcast, check out patreon.com/TrekUntold to learn how you can keep our ship operating at full power. You can also check out some of our merchandise at teespring.com/stores/TrekUntold. That's TEE spring.com. That includes shirts, stickers, mugs, phone cases, and a whole lot more. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this show and give us a review and rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. If you enjoy what we do here every week on this show, please give us a 5-star rating and review. It's the best way to make new listeners discover this podcast and help us grow. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions. If you'd like to send us some feedback, suggest a guest, would like to be booked on the show, or are interested in sponsoring us, email me at trekuntold@gmail.com. Once again, this has been Trek Untold. I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and until next time, fortune favors the bold.